Hi, and welcome to another edition of This Week in Plymouth. I am your host and your town manager, Derek Brindisi. This episode, we have two individuals from the planning department who have joined us to talk about a lot of things that are happening in planning. Our Director of Planning, Lee Hartmann, and our Deputy Director of Planning, Lauren Lynn. Thank you both for coming this afternoon.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having
All
us.
right. Yeah, thanks for being here. So again, like I mentioned, there's a lot of things that I want to talk about today. I think the last time, Lee, you were here, we had some planning board items we discussed, and Lauren, last time you were here, we had Steve Bolton, the chair of the planning board, to talk about the master plan. And so before we get into the questions, one thing I have on a regular basis have been talking to the select board about is over the past, I would say 24 months, the town staff have really focused on planning. And so the days are over where we would just react to a problem and try to come up with a solution. You know, we look at what the Health and Human Services Department is doing. They just started their master plan for Forges Field. They just started their master planning process for Hedges Pond Recreation Area. They're going to be in next week to do a presentation to the select board on Memorial Hall and that strategic plan. And then last, they'll be launching their community health assessment, which will be their 5-year strategic plan. And in large part, the planning department has been really leading the way around master planning here in this community. And so, as I mentioned, Lauren, the last time you were here, we talked about the 18-month, maybe longer master planning process that really hasn't been undertaken for over 20 years. And so, Lauren, can you give us an update as to the current status of the master plan process?
Absolutely. So it's been a few months since I was on the show. There's been a lot of activity. The master plan process has been doing a extensive community engagement and data collection phase in the last few months. It started with a kickoff meeting in June where we invited the community in, and it was well attended. I think there were about 200 people from the community who participated. And that first meeting was an introduction to what the master plan is, what the process would entail. There were a series of 3 other large community forums that were held at the Plymouth South Middle School. Those focused on different topics of the master plan. So breaking them down into, one night, for example, focused on housing and transportation, land use. Another night focused on climate resilience and sustainability. So those were held in October, November, and December. In addition, there was a listening session series that traveled around the community. So the intent of that was to go to people where they are and provide an opportunity so that not everybody had to come to your typical meeting at Town Hall. We did have one at Town Hall, but we focused on having these, whether they were elementary schools or community buildings in the different villages in town, including Cedarville, Manamet, West Plymouth, North Plymouth, Plymouth Center. We also had sessions at Red Brook and the Pine Hills. So throughout that, we were able to collect a lot of valuable input and hear people's thoughts and concerns, their priorities for the future. And now what we are doing is moving into the next phase of the plan. So taking all of this information along with our consultants' data collection and looking at what we've heard from the community, what the existing conditions are, and what does that mean for the priorities and goals for moving forward. So what we can look for the next few months, we have yet to confirm a date, but sometime in the spring or early summer, we'll be holding another community forum and inviting people back to see what we've heard, what those existing conditions are, and to have them start to react to what some potential strategies might be to meet the goals that the community has outlined, so that ultimately toward the end of this process, we'll have an action plan and strategies so that we can get the community to where we want to be in the next 10 to 15 years.
So do you feel comfortable that with everything you just outlined as far as all your community engagement activities, that you've been hearing from the community as far as what their expectations are for the future? Or do you think there's more work to be done as far as continued engagement?
I think I would say both. We have heard a lot of community engagement, whether it's been at these meetings. In addition, there have been opportunities to participate in online surveys. So anytime we had a forum, there was an equivalent survey online so that anybody who couldn't attend, or even if they did attend and had some follow-up thoughts that they thought of afterwards, they could share that with us. In addition, on the website that we've created for the master plan, all of the documents and resources are there. We have an interactive map where people can drop comments on around particular themes. And we've gotten a lot of comments on that. So that's been another opportunity for people to provide their input. But in addition, this is an ongoing process. It's not meant to be a static plan. We are going to have additional opportunity for public engagement and comment, and we look forward to working with the community throughout the life of this plan.
So that's a great point. So this show will be aired in a few days, and we'll continue to play it throughout the next 3 or 4 months. But you mentioned that you have this like ongoing process where folks can go to the website. Can you tell folks what website they can go to learn more about the master planning process?
Yes, absolutely. If you go to our town website, the Town of Plymouth website, you can go to the planning department page and navigate to the planning board. And right there is a link at the top for the master plan that will lead you to a dedicated website that's been prepared by our consultants that has all of the information, the documents, and the opportunity to comment. There's also an email, a project email that even if a survey has closed, there's an opportunity to submit comments through that email, and all of those are distributed to the master plan committee.
So you mentioned this summer you're going to come back to the community after you gather some more data. What is the timetable for completion of this project?
We are anticipating that we will wrap up the planning process, including the implementation strategy, by the fall, and then move into a public review and adoption phase that will include, it requires, per state law, it requires adoption by the planning board, but in addition, we'll also be visiting the select board, and ultimately, once the plan is in its final phase, we'll go to town meeting to ask for them to accept that plan.
So town meeting does have to accept the plan?
They don't have to accept it, but I think it's a good way to get additional buy-in. So hopefully at the end, we've done our job right. We're remind people that the master plan is not, we're not asking you as town meeting to accept everything that's in here, but to acknowledge the work that the planning board did, the committee did, the community did, acknowledge this as a document that is the town's master plan.
So Lee, as you pointed out, that this master plan ultimately will go to town meeting in 2026, right? That's fair to say. So for the folks at home, just to recap, if you are interested to learn more about the master planning process, go to the town website at www.plymouth-ma.gov, and then navigate your way over to the planning department's page, and you'll find all the information you need to know about the master plan.
I would also like to just point out early on when we started this, you mentioned all the master planning or planning work going on by Health and Human Services. We also have a Route 3A study that's underway by the town, as well as a comprehensive wastewater master plan that's underway by the DPW. So one of the other things we're doing through Lauren and the consultant is looking at all those other studies and making sure that whatever they're recommending and whatever the master plan has is all interwoven and all matching each other. Yes.
Right. No, that makes sense. And I did forget about the wastewater plan that just started, being led by a DPW director and our sewer superintendent, Doug Panat. So again, as you pointed out, Lee, there's a lot of planning that's taking place, and it's really going to set the stage for the next 5 to 20 years in this community. So, which is great. Which is another good segue to another master planning process that I know that Lee, you and Steve Cole from the Economic Development Foundation have been leading. This is the Holtec master planning process. So without me leading too much information, you want to describe to folks what that is?
Sure. So we were fortunate enough to secure a federal grant from the EDA, Economic Development Administration, to look at the Holtec property. So as everybody knows, the power plant has been decommissioned, and it is now being demolished. That they own 1,500 acres that is woodland and untouched. They own another couple hundred acres that actually where the plant sits. So we've heard a lot, you and my department have heard a lot from the community about concerns and opportunities with this property. So we took it as an opportunity to apply to the federal government for this grant. Because we're considered a post-nuclear community, we have special consideration for grants. So we were fortunate enough to receive this grant, about $300,000. We have hired a world-class firm, Sasaki, to do the work for us. So Sasaki right now is in the process of holding public forums, talking to the community, and collecting background information. And that will, so I'll point out, so we first had a survey. We had almost 4,000 responses to the survey. In my professional career, I've never seen anything like that. That is a phenomenal turnout of public participation. We had somewhere between 160 and 180 people attend our forum last Thursday, where we again were asking the community what their thoughts were. This will now all be presented at a joint meeting next Tuesday night to the Planning Board, Select Board, and Economic Development Foundation and report back to them. Then moving forward, they'll come back with some scenarios and say, based on what we've heard from the community, here are the things we think might work. Here are the things that probably won't work. Here are some opportunities that the town might want to consider. And the goal here is when we're done, and I should point out we've been working closely with Holtec all the way through this process too, so that when we come out on the other end, we'll have some preferred outcomes for what could happen on this property, hopefully as, again, a point to build community consensus as we move forward. I think in almost every case, there'll be zoning changes required at town meeting. There'll be partnerships needed with the private development community as well as Holtec. So again, hopefully this will be the starting point for working with Holtec and the community and trying to figure out what the best outcome is. I should point out that as we've gone through this, overwhelmingly, the goal has been to protect the majority of this land. This is untouched woodlands that have sat there for decades, have not been used for any other use. So again, I think what we've heard from the community is let's protect a majority of this land. The challenge is how do you pay for that and how do you offset that? We'll have to look at it. And just one caveat to say with the new change in federal administration, we're fairly confident that our grant is going to hold through, but we are back and forth with EDA, making sure that their commitment to us for this money is still there and not one of the many federal programs that have been put on hold. And so far, we have not been told that it's on hold.
Yeah, so that's a good point. I was going to ask you that. So just so it's clear for the folks at home that this $300,000 we received from the federal government to fund this master planning process is going to continue. As what we know today, right? It certainly could change tomorrow, but fingers crossed we'll continue this process. And when you have 4,000 respondents in a survey, I mean that speaks to the sensitivity of this Holtec property. You know, I've been here 3 years now, and during the course of my 3 years, oftentimes that's all I hear about is what's going to happen with this Holtec property once they put it up for sale. You know, is this going to be sold to a residential developer, for example? We don't want that to happen. We want to preserve this. So during the process, when the Select Board was negotiating the most recent pilot program, they recognized that we didn't want to wait for the land to become available for sale and then figure out what we're going to do with it. We want to be ahead of that, to your point, develop a master plan so that when the land does become available, we know exactly what we want to do in each section of the 1,500 acres. So, you know, that being said, how does this master planning process, it sounds like you're taking a lot of the same strategies out of the master planning process, how does that tie into the master plan?
I think this will end up as a component of the overall master plan. So the two consultants have met a few times now, have exchanged information and the work they've done, sharing information on surveys and the public outreach, the analysis they've done today. So again, I see this as being in some ways a subset of the overall master plan.
So again, for folks at home, if you are interested in the Holtec master plan, as Lee pointed out, there will be a joint meeting on February 25th at 6 p.m. at the Select Board meeting that will have the Select Board, the members of the Economic Development Foundation, and the Planning Board all in session to talk about an update on the Holtec master planning process. So is there a website similar
Sure.
as well?
So if you go into the Planning Department's website, there is, we call it the Pilgrim 1,600 acre area plan. So if you look at that and click on that, there's a website information you can email if you have any comments. I do think it's important that sometimes we lose sight of the fact that this is privately owned property too. And I think my closing comment on this one would be that we all have to remember it's privately owned and that there are limits to what government can do or dictate on private property. And that, again, I think is a big reason why we want to have this consensus building, especially with the property owner too, because it is private. And as much as we'd like to tell them what to do, we have to work with them because that's the way our state and federal constitution works.
Well, and one of our advantages, again, going back to the pilot agreement signed by the Select Board a year and a half ago, is that we were able to negotiate a 9-month first right of refusal. So for those folks who are at home right now thinking, well, what happens if they want to sell the land to a residential developer? We actually have 9 months where we can go to town meeting, seek an appropriation to acquire this land. So we do have a little bit of an advantage, but given the high cost that we believe is going to be associated with acquiring this land, we have a lot of work to do in the future.
And I will give you and the select board credit because you do have the Nuclear Stabilization Fund that you're going again to town meeting to look for additional funding to be put into that. And that will be an important part of the tools to be proactive as far as acquiring this property too. And I don't want to minimize the planning that you and the select board have had over the years to have money saved up to hopefully use that to acquire some of this land for preservation.
It's an interesting point because the select board oftentimes recently have been criticized for commercial growth or residential development. But in my mind, because I work very closely with the 5 selectmen, they are very much laser focused on preservation of open space. And so to your last point, last year they put an additional $500,000 into that nuclear stabilization account. They are proposing and recommending again this year to go to town meeting for another $500,000, and it'll take our balance around about $10.5 million. So that money, as you pointed out, would be used to help acquire that land. So they really do focus on conservation, although folks don't see it as often.
And we do know the acquisition of a majority of this is tens of millions of dollars. So
right.
We're not talking about 10 million, we're talking something well over that, multiple times over that. So again, it's a great piece and maybe a great one for matching grants. So that doesn't have to have the burden of acquisition all on the taxpayer, but it is a great piece for that starting point.
Yeah, and we plan to use that. So, more to come on the Holtec master plan. But again, if folks want to go to the planning department's website, look for 1,600-acre plan, right? That's what it's called. So not the Holtec plan, it's called the
Pilgrim 1,600-acre area plan.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so let's move on. We have about 10 more minutes, and I wanted to get to a little bit more of a controversial topic. There's been a lot of discussions over the last couple months of it's about 30-acre parcel of land on Hedges Pond Road that has recently been sold by the Economic Development Foundation to a local developer. And so I want to try to get through a lot of the misinformation that's out there today. And Lee, you've had a lot of longevity here in town, you have a lot of historical knowledge. I want to go back, if you can, to the 3 articles that were presented at town meeting back in 2018.
Sure, and so I'd start off by saying that I was very involved in this process in 2018, but I would point out that since then, since I do sit on the foundation, I have had no real involvement in this since the P&S was negotiated with a private property owner or with the permitting. I've left the permitting to Lauren and the rest of the team to do that. I've had no real involvement. But in 2018, we had looked at this property. We have, as you know, a goal of the selectmen, and we hear it everywhere I go. What can you do to reduce the burden on residential taxpayers? We need something other than residential tax base to support all the things that we provide as a government. So as we were looking, we saw this opportunity. We had a number of community meetings. We met with the Cedarville Steering Committee. We notified abutters. We had workshops down in the community where we presented a concept where we would take this 30 some odd acres of land, have it set aside for commercial development, in return be protecting 134 other acres that are not protected right now as conservation land, and to take proceeds of this money and use it towards infrastructure improvements. We know that when you look at the Herring Pond Road, State Road intersection, especially in the summer, the backups are very long. And there are some safety issues. You have a lot of issues with the conflict on State Road and Herring Pond Road with cars trying to get onto State Road. So again, we worked this out. We went to town meeting with a package that authorized the select board to permanently protect the 134 acres, to rezone the property from residential and general commercial to this Cedarville Village Enterprise District, and to authorize the transfer of ownership of that property to the foundation, who would ultimately sell it to a third party. So again, I think when we talk about how you look at a win-win situation, in 2018 when we presented this to town meeting, unanimously approved, we were able to protect a very large piece of property. I can tell you from my experience, it's very unusual to have mitigation for any project that approaches $2 million. That's almost unprecedented. especially for a 30-acre piece of property. So the $2 million is also a great piece to have to be able to start to look at those intersection improvements in that area.
So I'm happy you gave folks kind of a summary of what took place in 2018. Over the last 5 to 6 weeks, the select board have received a number of folks coming under public comment and challenging the select board. In fact, a question came up last night. Did town meeting even know what they were voting for? Did they understand that this land was going to be used for commercial development? And, one of our selectmen who was on the board at that time said absolutely. And so I just want to circle back with some of the things that you said, Lee. So one, you said there was an article that rezoned that land for commercial use.
Correct.
So clearly, if town meeting voted for that land to be rezoned for commercial use, they understood what the purpose of that land was going to be. Is that fair to say?
Yes, definitely. Yep.
And then another vote that they had taken that day was to take 37 acres and specifically give the select board authority to transfer that land for the purposes of commercial development.
Correct.
And so town meeting took action on that, understood that. Then the select board then took further action to transfer that over. And I think the last article was to put the 137 acres into conservation. Correct? So to me, as you'd explained it, and folks who are at home, if they're interested in researching those articles, go to the town clerk's office. Those articles are all on file, have been certified by the town clerk back in 2018. But those are the facts of that, actually what took place during that time.
And I would point out that after town meeting's vote, we created an ad hoc traffic committee too. So residents, as we went through the public process, said we're really concerned about traffic. We are okay with this zoning change, but we really would like to see some traffic mitigation. So after town meeting, we actually created an ad hoc traffic committee who met a number of different times. We engaged the town, DPW, we engaged Mass Highway, and we engaged GPI, a consultant, to look at possible alternatives. We had meetings with Mass Highway. So again, even after we went to town meeting, we had a very public process to follow up to talk about what actions and steps can we take to mitigate the current problems from the that we have in Cedarville for traffic.
And so again, to effectuate the vote of town meeting, right?
Correct.
And so last night, the select board, they voted to accept that $2 million from the sale of that property. Right now, so folks are aware, there are, as you pointed out, the Hedges Pond Road intersection, the Herring Pond Road intersection. We'll be working with our DPW, who will be engaging a engineering firm to design improvements in those two. There could be 2 roundabouts, it could be a roundabout and signalization. They're not quite sure yet, but the idea is that once those 2 intersections are designed, then the town will advance those on a 25% design to Mass DOT so that we can put on a TIP project.
And a TIP is Transportation Improvement Program. So working through the Old Colony Planning Council, they have a 5-year transportation plan, and these items are put on, and as money is available, they advance through the process for funding because the $2 million will be a great start, but will not be enough to fund all of it. I should also point out we're very much aware and paying attention to what happens with the 2 new bridges for Cape Cod Canal.
Right.
And so, again, these types of improvements I think are necessary as mitigation during construction, but also represent a relatively small cost compared to the overall project. So we're also hopeful that as that program progresses, that we'll be able to piggyback on that and get some of these improvements done as mitigation for the impacts we know that are coming when that bridge work starts.
And we had a meeting recently with the state delegation and encouraging them to keep us apprised of the bridge project so that we can include those projects into our project. So we only have a couple more minutes left, but I do want to just touch on a subject because there are some folks that feel aggrieved of this project on 71 Hedges Pond Road. And then a number of these folks have been going to the select board meeting and they have been asking the select board to rescind the building permit. And so, not to get into the details of this, but what would be the process if I was in a butt and I felt aggrieved to this project, any other project? What would I need to do in order to feel that I could get some relief?
Yes, so let me explain briefly the history that happened in recent months. The building department received a zoning permit application for the project. Typically, these uses, which are proposed for the site, if these were to be on individual parcels, there would not be any need for any other board review because they would be considered by right in the Cedarville Village Enterprise District.
Okay.
This was referred to the planning board because they were looking to do a unified complex, which in essence really means that they were looking to do one singular driveway access to reduce the amount of cuts and entrances added to Hedges Pond Road. And in addition, it provides an opportunity to do a shared parking between the 4 buildings that were proposed.
Makes sense.
So that went to the planning board for their review. And the planning board's decision is really structured in an advisory report to the building commissioner. The building commissioner is the authority that has the power to issue a permit of this nature. So that was a process that went through the planning board in the fall. There were a series of meetings. A peer review was conducted that looked at the proposed project, gave some recommendations as to how they might reduce some of the proposed earth removal that is necessary to produce the pad for the site for development. And that was all taken into consideration. A revised plan was put forward, and that is what was advised from the planning board to issue permits to the building commissioner. The building commissioner did issue the building permits for the project. And at this point, there has been an appeal filed in the appeal window we received at the end of last week. So that now the building commissioner's decision was referred to the zoning board, who hears any appeals of this nature. And the zoning board will be holding a public hearing in the spring with a date coming soon to hear this. So if anybody is interested, there will be an opportunity to attend the zoning board meetings. Any zoning board public hearing is open to the public. So that'll be an opportunity for people to hear those concerns.
So that's a great recap. So just so I'm clear, the building commissioner issues a building permit, right? And then that building permit, if someone were to file an appeal, that appeal goes to the ZBA. That's their role. It's not the select board. So unfortunately, folks have felt like the select board could do something about this, but that's why we have checks and balances. That's our form of government where we have different boards that have different authorities. So we have run out of time. So I appreciate you both being here today. Hopefully have you both back this summer. We'll talk more about master planning in the future. So thank you all for attending this episode of This Week in Plymouth. If you want more information, again, go to our website at plymouth-ma.gov. Thanks again.